So the connection between the Pentecostal movement and the divine science movement is this awareness that the Holy Spirit can be alive in us and can be expressed through us in those gifts that Paul outlined, including having people understand us regardless of what we think we are saying and what language we believe we are speaking. The other thing is interpreting tongues. That's the final gift of the Spirit. That when someone is speaking in tongues, whatever that means, however one's interpreting it, the person listening can hear what is actually being said. So in a Pentecostal church, you may hear people engaged in glossolalia, letting those sounds come through, and then you may see someone over here saying, what that person is saying is this. So those are some of the gifts of the Spirit that come out of the Pentecostal movement, and is why divine science, which says anything is possible, becomes something that Pentecostal folks can shift into very easily. They're much less likely to shift straight into religious science. They might shift into unity because the emphasis on Christ. I hope that was a useful context, because divine science is where Nona Brooks grew up and what she ended up being in charge of. As you will see when you listen to her biography, she and her sisters created the Denver School and Church of Divine Science. And then her sisters died, and she continued for another 20 years after her sisters died, managing the school, managing the church, teaching and writing. And during that time, connected that school and church with the rest of the world, including ordaining both Emmett Fox and Ernest Holmes. So, very important in our roots. Did you want to say something, Sandra? Okay.
Dr. Miller.
Yes, Donald.
One thing that I have found as I've stepped out of the Pentecostal arena and stepped into the more New Thought, New Age, I'm also a Reiki master. You find that what was speaking in tongues and things that was once the purview of just the Pentecostals, now you're seeing it come up in alternative spiritual settings known as light language.
Yep.
And it'd be interesting to pick your mind at a later date about this too. But what I find interesting about a lot of us Pentecostals that transitioned in New Thought also happen to be LGBTQ.
Funny thing about that. I understand the openness to being loving in whatever form being loving feels right. That's in the New Thought movement. We're called one of the liberal religious traditions. Thank you for sharing that, Donald. All right, so let's look at Nona. Nona grew up in this movement. She actually was introduced to Emma Curtis Hopkins when she was 18, 19 years old. She was dealing with a major illness that was killing her. She was causing her throat to close up so she couldn't eat, and she was starving. The doctors had given up on her. The doctors had also given up on one of her neighbors, a woman named Kate Bingham, and Kate Bingham came back from her month stay with Emma Curtis Hopkins, totally healed, and following Emma's instructions to make this your own and teach it so that you continue to have the power. And so Mrs. Bingham rounded up all the people that she could. I'm guessing it's all women because all references are to the women. And the classes started, and Nona and her sisters attended the first one and took Emma's statements or instructions, guidance to keep your mind continually filled with these words, and took it very seriously. They were very good girls, and they did what they were told. So my imagination has them going around the house, doing their cleaning, doing their chores, while they're walking, whatever they're doing, repeating all of lesson one's statements over and over again. And then we go into lesson 2, where Emma has introduced the idea that there is no power of evil. There can be, therefore, no sickness, no sin, and no death. Well, for someone who's been told she's starving to death, that must have been a very interesting, literally, pill to swallow, very difficult. But she allowed herself to repeat those words along with the other words, and her sisters reinforced it. And the third lesson, she went in, and the third lesson is, what do we replace the negations with? This is where Emma says our affirmations are exceedingly effective when we have said the proper, the right, the most fitting negations, right? So Mrs. Bingham is teaching lesson 3, and she's introducing the affirmations. And the third affirmation is I live and move and have my being in God the good, omnipotent. And at that point, the room lit up for Nona. It turned into light. Everything was glowing, and then there was only the light. And in the light was a voice or a presence that was asking, what is it that you will? The reason I'm telling you this, those of you who will watch the show on Tuesday will hear it again. But the reason I'm telling you this is all of her treatments henceforth were based on this experience, getting into that space for her that felt as only light and that loving presence asking what she willed. She said, of course, I will to be healed. And as the light faded, she realized that she could swallow with no effort and breathe with no effort. And so as she and her sister are leaving this classroom, she's saying, I'm healed, I'm healed. And her sister is saying, keep doing your affirmations. And it wasn't until her meal that night, where she ate a full meal, that everyone realized Nona really was healed. Very soon thereafter, on coming home from one of the other classes, they stopped at their elder sister's home, and their daughter had been injured. Her elder sister is Althea. Althea's daughter had been injured and was a hemophiliac. So everyone panicked except for Fanny, who sat down and said, all right, Nona, you treat the child and I will treat you. So Nona did that same process. Fanny is holding the space so it's Althea, Fanny, and Nona. Those are the 3. Fanny is holding the space for Nona to be able to get into the light, while Nona is treating to feel the light and to claim the well-being of the child. They succeeded. The child was healed, never bled again in any more than little drops like anybody else. And the word began to get out into the community, and thus was Nona Brooks' healing career launched. She went on to become a school teacher and supported herself as a school teacher while her sisters married, and they moved to Denver, and she would spend her summers going up there, and they rented a space for her to use, and people would come in for Nona to heal them, to do treatments. And she did like a minimum of 10 a day, sometimes 30, 40 a day. And one of my favorite stories is at the end of a very long day, a man came into the space she was in, and he had boils on his neck. And she looked at him and she said, oh, that's nothing. And it was gone. She was so in the space that she didn't even need to go into it really to accomplish it. And I think that's a really useful thing to be aware of. We're used to saying, oh, you have to do this whole thing. No, once you're in that consciousness, you can negate and affirm anything. Yeah, that's nothing. You're fine, right? So what is it that she taught about this process? And I do have something that I can share with you if you would like to read it. I'll read more of it. Would you like to see what it is?
Sure. Yes.
All right. I'm sharing my screen. And what I'm pulling up is something that is online as Nona Brooks' Short Lessons in Divine Science. Now, Nona passed in 1943. She was working part-time. She'd taken a long break and she went back in 38. And this was probably the last book of her writings that was out there. And this is in lesson 7, and it's to show why we pray and the best method of prayer. Right? So a new conception of God calls for a new method of prayer. So she's teaching some beginners, and she is saying, we have been taught to think of God as someone out there that we have to persuade or beg to or sacrifice for. But in the second sentence, she tells us we no longer feel that we must overcome God's reluctance, but rather that we are to lay hold of his willingness. Remember, in her experience, it was, what is it you will? I will that you be happy was kind of woven into that. We are to lay hold of God's willingness. More willing is he to give than we are to receive. And this is another basic New Thought concept. The giving is always happening. I can't see you right now, so you are going to have to speak out. We okay? All right. In order then to learn how to pray, let us turn to our basis, omnipresence. Omnipresence was the essence of what Nona Brooks stood for in the New Thought world. And in fact, when Ernest Holmes met her in 1918 at the International New Thought Alliance, he watched her all day. And he wanted to interview her, and he finally got a chance to interview her. And he came up to her and he said, I figured out your secret. And she looked at him and he said, it's omnipresence. Right? This means, she says in this text, this means God everywhere. Therefore, God includes me. I can say with authority, I am in God and God is in me. And remember what that third lesson was that was the beginning of her healing experience. I live and move and have my being in God, the good omnipotent. So here she is in 1940, after having had that experience in 1887, right? I am in God and God is in me. Therefore, I share God being, God mind, God life. And then she says, quoting the Bible, all mine is thine, saith the Lord. By sharing himself with us, God gives us every good gift. Before we call, he has supplied. God is abundance. So this is a new conception of God, which is fundamental to New Thought, but isn't always our experience. And Nona was aiming for it to be our experience of the constant givingness of the divine presence in everything, everywhere. And she says, if I seem to lack any good thing, it is because I have not believed fully in God's immediate presence. Not believed fully. If you remember in lesson 4, in Emma's lesson 4, she says our faith is what we deep down believe and know to be true. So she's talking about that. I don't have faith in God's immediate presence. I'm not feeling it. I'm not living it. I'm not operating as if the good is always present. Okay? She says God is doing his part. I don't need to beg or ask him to do more, but I must do my part. So our part is what we are talking about in the prayer process. She says, I must train my thought to recognize steadfastly the immediacy and fullness of God's presence. Bingo. Train our thoughts. That's what it's all about. To be able to constantly feel, constantly, steadfastly, continually feel the divine presence working in us and through us. To get back into the relationship with the Pentecostal movement, that's the Holy Spirit moving and working in us. That's the Christ mind being our mind. It's that same sense. And then she says, I must not permit an opposing thought to stay. Okay, so that's getting rid of anything unlike what it is we're ready to experience now. So her process, I'm stopping the reading right now, her process was to repeat and fill her mind with all of the qualities of the divine until that was all there was in her awareness. And then she would experience the light. Whether she was sitting next to a deathbed or working with people in that rented room while she was still teaching, or up on the dais when she was the lead minister of the Divine Science Church of Denver, Colorado, didn't matter. That was what she was doing. So then she says, what's the commonest opposing thought? To go back to the text, it is fear, for fear denies the presence of God. If I'm concerned about something or worried about something, I'm saying God isn't present. Because God is good, God is the only power, the only presence, the only possibility is good. So if I'm worried about anything else, I'm saying it's not happening. So she says, hence, we must not permit fear thought to stay for a moment. We can put it out by denying it or negating or dissolving, pick a word that works for you, and also by substituting for fear its opposite, conscious unity, love. By affirming, I do not fear, for God is here this moment, and repeating this statement with positiveness until all fear goes. I'm going to come out of screen sharing for a little while. This repeating over and over again what is true rather than allowing the thought that isn't true to fill our minds is a huge part of it. And every time I read that line or one like it, I'm reminded of becoming Maria von Trapp when she's leaving the convent, going to be the governess for these children. And she is in the bus and she's starting to say, I have confidence. I have confidence in sunshine. I have confidence in rain. I have confidence. I have confidence. And finally, she's getting off the bus and she's dancing in that awfully ugly dress and hat and that terrible little suitcase that she's carrying. And I have confidence in me, right? She has undone her fear until she turns around and looks at the front door. And then it all comes tumbling back in. And then she has to take a deep breath and repeat again, I have confidence. I have confidence. And Nona would be saying, God is the only presence. The only presence is good. The only presence wants the best for me and is constantly giving it to me. Even when I am not receiving it, it is being given to me. And there is a story about the poor man who got to heaven and was arguing with God. How come you didn't make me a rich man? I was a good man. How come I wasn't rich? And God says, let me show you something. And he takes him around a little ways and he shows him buildings and riches and gold and all these marvelous things and said, they're all here waiting for you. You just never claimed them. Right? It's not that they weren't being provided. It's that the person hadn't got rid of the conflicting thoughts, the fearful thoughts, the painful memories enough to fill their mind completely with the knowing of the omnipresence of good, our abundant supply. And the other day, some of us were talking and we were aware that at no time in our lives have we been without every support we needed for that moment. We wouldn't be here on the planet right now if we didn't have everything we needed for every moment up till now. Right? So we did, and we do. And that is because it's always being supplied to the measure we are willing to receive. So I'm going to go back to Nona again and her writing in that lesson 7. And if I seem to lack any good thing, it's because I haven't believed fully, right? I must not allow an opposing thought to stay, she says. Then she says, in harmony of any kind, sickness or lack, shows that we are ignoring God's presence. Isn't that marvelous? We're ignoring. It's like God's sitting in the room saying, what do you need? I've got it here for you. And we're ignoring it because we haven't believed it was possible. And we only perceive what we're trained to perceive. And our brains are wired to perceive in certain ways. If we have a wiring in our brain that says we don't have something, we're not going to see it when it is there. We aren't going to see the opportunities that are there. So she does say, let us affirm that which is consistent with God's presence. Health, ever-present, changeless health. Supply, ever-present, abundant supply. Now, Nona had to learn that one could treat for the long haul. You didn't have to do every situation as it came up. It took her a long time to get that, and she was nearly exhausted because everyone was asking her to treat for every single situation. But at one point, she began the process of incorporating into the treatment for the situation the treatment for the long haul, the knowing, that feeling that not only this, but all of it, not only this one thing, but the whole. So her center, her church in Denver, became very, very beautiful. It's a gorgeous building, became called the Althea Center, named after her older sister, and is also, stood there and was well attended and well funded without anyone having to work hard to make it so. Notice, though, she says, this is not all of prayer. It is the lesser part. Recognizing this, prayer is active communion. No passivity or resignation in prayer. When we have prayed, let us answer our own prayer. God has answered it before we called. Remember, that's something that we see in the New Testament. Jesus says in front of the tomb that Lazarus is in, I thank you, God, that you've already answered my prayer. Or when there's all the people who need food, he said, I thank you for your abundant supply, when it didn't look like there was enough. It was already answered before we called. So let us affirm the presence of all good. Our affirmations are for the purpose of clearing our mentality of wrong conceptions and establishing within it the certainty. We bring our own prayers to fulfillment by living them out in our lives. Those of you who've been trained in religious science have heard something about, we treat and then move with our feet. It's not, I treat that it's going to be okay and then I go out and make it okay. That's not at all what that means. What it means is that we live the affirmed situation. All right. And Neville Goddard teaches this as well. We accept it, we feel it already done, and then we operate it already done. We move in the direction of it's already done. So she's talking about an illustration of a situation between her and a friend of long standing. It hurts. I learned by turning to my basis. And what is our basis? Omnipresence. I'd learned by turning to my basis that I can write it by prayer. I can fix it by prayer. Every situation we come to, I'm coming back into view here. Every situation we come to is not to be fixed in the outer world. It is to be known to be fixed in the inner world. There is nothing we need do. That's lesson 5 in Emma. The greatest power is knowing there is nothing we need do in any situation. We need to know the truth of the omnipresence of infinite well-being in the situation. We rest in that knowing, and we act from that knowing. And that's what Nona Brooks offers us as the way to experience powerful and effective prayer treatments. Feel the omnipresence. Feel the presence of that which that you are about to ask for being already here, okay? Feel the willingness always to provide everything that wants to be provided. It's already here. If there's a tradition in New Thought, I couldn't desire it if it weren't already here. Can you imagine how that might be? Right? And it makes me wonder how many communities, small villages that that I've created in my mind that are already in existence. Yes, Robin.
What if you change your mind a lot? What if you have a great thought and then another thought comes in your head and then it's like, oh, that's even better than the other one. But then another one comes in and it's like I tend to have a lot of things that are great ideas, but I'm not sure how to hone them in. And when I ask, it's like, well, which one are they going to, we changed your mind and that frequency changed in quantum physics. So what are you going to do now? So I get that. So
I love that. Thank you, Robin. And so that explains why you're moving around a lot right now, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does. It really does.
Right. So there's a line in the very beginning of the book, Conversations with God, Volume 1. And Neil says, if
Yes,
you're really God, why haven't you given me what I've asked for? And God says, I've given you everything you asked for. You just keep changing your mind.
Yep.
Then
So
God said, go.
Go ahead.
Then God says to Neil Donald Walsh, choose something now. And Neil Donald Walsh says, I choose the right. And God says, I'm waiting. I told you, I've choose the right. I choose going to the right. God says, I'm waiting, still waiting. Finally, Neil gets up and starts moving toward the right. And God says, oh, good, now I can help you.
Yeah. Action.
Yep.
Take action.
We act as if we act in the knowing that is already fulfilled. We don't act to make it fulfilled.
No, I know that. I just changed my mind a lot. That's all.
I get that. So, so what is good? I'm going to say, well, Emma teaches this in, I think it's lesson 11. She says, if you are having difficulty making a decision, it's because you've let someone else's will other than yours guide your decision-making process.
Hmm.
So I say if we think we should, ought, must, gotta, have to, we probably are not choosing from our own being. And it's back to what I said earlier with Sonia. If it's enjoyable, if it is effortless to do, if it's energizing as I've done it, it's mine to do. But if I think I should do, or I think the right thing to do, or I think the best way to do something to get something that I want, all of that is outside stuff guiding my thoughts. But if I go into the silence and I say, what right now is the most enjoyable, energizing thing that feels like mine to do? And I do that, invariably, and it's just the one thing right now, invariably that moves me to something that is beyond anything I could have imagined, first of all, but is so fulfilling and so satisfying and all those other qualities that is, it's just overwhelming sometimes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. So the three
That makes
E's,
sense.
3 E's. It's effortless to do. It's enjoyable as I'm doing it. It's energizing when I'm done. And I got that out of,
If it doesn't feel that, go ahead.
and I got that out of a series of entrepreneurs. But you were saying,
Fabulous, don't do it.
right. If you don't feel fabulous doing it, don't do it now. You may choose to do it in 5 minutes. That's fine. Yeah, or 5 years. That's fine too. But right now, it's not mine to do. All right. Because I can trust the omnipresence of good. So if I'm stepping into more good, because it's enjoyable, energizing, and effortless, right? I'm just experiencing more and more of the good that is already present. And I'm not saying I have to do something I should, or someone else told me, or someone said was better or was right to get to the place of my good, because my good's here now. If I allow it and stop ignoring it. Yes, Sonia.
One thing I noticed today was that I was I was thinking about money and going, well, I'd like to, I was doing this kind of deduction, kind of like the statement and the belief, and I was like, well, I want more money, but what's the belief? And there
Your
was like
belief is that you don't
conditioning.
have enough.
I noticed that there was a lot of conditions that I was putting on to the wanting of more money. And I was like, well, no, you don't need conditions for money. You just, why you want it? Because it's fun to have it. It's like, so it was quite, what was this? It was really interesting to really do that work. Like, oh, no, you don't need to have a condition for that. Like,
you don't need an excuse for it.
yeah, you don't need an excuse for it. Like, and then I said,
the
well,
other piece, Sonia, the underlying piece though that I'm hearing is the belief that you don't have enough.
right. And I've been working with some wording on that as well.
Shift to gratitude. Shift to gratitude. You have more than enough. This is the Daniel Nahman song. There's more than enough. There's always more than enough. Why would I worry? Why would I doubt? Because more than enough is the divine omnipresent presence.
Yeah, and I've noticed that has been one of my themes last few days is just as soon as I start thinking this, oh, I don't have enough, I'm like, nope, I have enough.
Cancel,
I have enough.
cancel.
There's enough. Yeah, just doing this like
There's
It's
more
funny
than,
how much it's really in there, but
oh
it's
yeah,
like,
it's the culture. It's the culture. Let it go.
well,
Yeah.
I grew up during the recession, so in the
Hey,
80s.
we
So,
all have our story.
it's like there's conditioning, but it's
Write
like, okay,
down every
rewind that.
penny that you receive, every gift you receive, every free service you receive, and then write down all that you give away, all the time you give away, all the service you give away, so you can see how much more, all the clothing you give away, so that you can see how much more you have than you need, and you are
Yeah.
constantly receiving. And that way you'll start to feel what is already present. You've just been ignoring it because of this other wiring in the brain. Okay, this is the act as if part. This is the living it part. We allow ourselves to experience it, we claim it, and we live it. And Nona gave us several new ways to do that beyond the other folks that we've been talking about. And it is now 6:30, so I need to call this over. Thank you. Thank you so
Ma'am?
much. It's been a treat.
Can I,
Yes,
I'll see you tomorrow, or you're gonna be in Portland, Ben tomorrow?
I will be in Bend tomorrow meeting with the prayer team at 3.
Okay, I'll see you there.
Thank you so
All
much.
right, dear. Bye, loves.
Okay,
Have fun.
bye,
Bye.
bye.
Bye.